recording here. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Florida Butterfly Gardening webinar. My name is Tia Silvasi, and I have my fellow extension agent, Tina McIntyre here, and I'm with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Orange County. And Tina is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with UF IFAS Extension, Seminole County. So spring is such a good time for butterfly gardening, and we're going to teach you all the basics of what you need to know in our class today to attract butterflies, the larval host plants, the adult plants for the nectar, and some other Florida-friendly landscaping tips to help you maintain and let your butterfly garden thrive. So the Florida-friendly landscaping program is with the University of Florida and also in partnership with the Environmental Protection Department. And we kind of base all of our guiding decisions for our landscape on these 9 principles. And they're not standalone, they really work together beautifully. If you follow the 9 principles, then you'll be making good decisions for what to do in your landscape. Today's class is going to focus on Florida-friendly landscaping principle number 5, which is to attract wildlife. And attracting bees and butterflies and birds to your garden is not only something that brings you enjoyment, but you're helping nature, you're helping provide food for these precious little creatures, and doing it in a way that just benefits everybody. Butterfly gardens are so important because a lot of our urban areas really lack biodiversity. So planting flowers, it helps to provide food and habitat. Butterflies get pollen and nectar from flowers. And you can see this picture here is just, a normal Florida subdivision, and a lot of houses, a lot of driveways, garages, but they could use a lot more plants and trees. And if everybody just planted a little bit in their backyard, then it would be more of a wildlife sanctuary. So what we do in our own backyard can have an effect on the environment, and everybody planting a little bit for the butterflies will help make a more butterfly friendly community. So Tina, why don't you give us some basics about creating habitat for butterflies?
Absolutely. So, just kind of building on that, we definitely want to embrace these little insect animals because they're the foundation of the food web. So lots of things eat the caterpillars and things. So we want to build that habitat by starting with the plants. So we plant a variety of flowering plants. It could be ground covers, like we see here, this various types of salvia, trees, shrubs, and really just having that layering. We're trying to mimic the ecology of nature where we have the ground covers and then the understory, the tree canopy. And so we want to be able to mimic that so that we have the various, parts of habitat that they can exist in. So we want to provide the nectar and the larval host plants. And we'll talk a lot about this today, because the caterpillar is really focused on something very different than the adult butterfly. So we want to provide both sources, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And we definitely want to include natives. So a lot of these animals have, co-evolved as pollinators. They're co-evolving with the shape of the flower. And so in some instances, they can be very particular to what they want, not only as a nectaring butterfly, but also as a larval caterpillar. So we want to make sure that we hit on some natives. There's a lot of non-natives that can also be great. Like in this picture, we have the bottle brush and the salvia, but natives can particularly provide that, kind of easy access that they're accustomed to. And then we want to plant in full sun or at least in part sun. So a lot of our butterfly areas are going to prefer a very sunny habitat, but you can definitely work with a part sun environment. It's going to be really challenging to do butterfly gardening in the shade. Not impossible, but really it's recommended that they do have some sun available.
Yeah, and talking about natives, Tina, like I was looking at the UF IFAS list of butterflies yesterday, and some butterflies are very specific. Like they really have their native plant, like the frog fruit or even the oak tree. So you can really get some unique insects and butterflies by planting a variety of native plants.
That's right. I know for those of you I saw in Miami, down south, they have the Atala butterfly that's very specific to coon plants. And
Oh yeah,
so
that's right.
we won't, I don't think, cover that today, but that is one specific one that it likes that plant, and they're very co-evolved in that way. So one thing about butterflies, and this is really looking at the adult, is they love color. So we want, and I know I love color in my garden as well. So it's a
Love
good
color.
fit. It's a great mix, especially for spring. Just showing a few here, we have our state wildflower, of course, yellow. They're going to be attracted to these beautiful yellow blossoms. And you can see here on the right, it's not only our butterflies that we're serving those other great pollinators too. So there's lots of varieties of Coreopsis. That's why we put this SPP, which means plural for many species. So you can get any type of Coreopsis, and it's going to be a great, again, that's our state wildflower, hardy plant for dry and wet areas, depending on the species. We also have blanket flower. This is one of my favorites. I grew up with this plant. I just love seeing it in the landscape. Seeing it, you can see it on the dunes throughout the state, in the interior of the state, along lakesides. A great plant to add that red color to your landscape. So this is also known as Gaillardia, is the scientific binomial and common name blanket flower. The top right, we have purple, and this is called spotted horsemint or monarda. And it's also known as bee balm. So this one has a couple common names, and that's why we do like to stick with our binomials, because it tells us exactly what plant we're talking about. But this is really a wildlife attractor. You can see here this wasp species kind of taking advantage of that plant and the habitat that's getting created by that species. So it's a prolific reseeder as well. So it'll just kind of grow itself in your landscape. I don't know about you, Tia, but in our demonstration landscapes, it'll just pop up, and not in an invasive way, but just in a nice,
Yeah,
compatible way.
sustainable.
And then, yeah. And then the bottom right, we have firebush, and this one's going to get a little bigger. This is going to be pretty like a large shrub. It can do a shady environment, but it also takes full sun, so it's pretty versatile in that way. And this is going to give those tubular orange flowers that are not only enjoyed by the butterflies, but also the hummingbirds. So it's a fantastic addition.
Yeah, that one's a hummingbird magnet. That and that coral honeysuckle vine. I saw a hummingbird yesterday in my yard.
Nice. Yeah, they're around this time of year too. So they're also a fun pollinator. So butterflies see in ultraviolet light. So they're not going to see things in the same way that we are. So this is just kind of a quick, shot of what they might be seeing. Insects tend to have a compound eye, and so they're having a different visual experience in the world than we are. But you can see where it's targeting in these really highly white spots. It's saying this is where the reward is. This is where the nectar is, and so it has these beautiful. In this case, this is our horseman on the left. That spotted horseman or monarda, just gorgeous. But you can see the petals, those are actually bracts, the type of petal, essentially are drawing it in. And then you have, really where that nectar is really focusing in. So they go in, and that's where they get their nectar source. And you can see, I think on the right, we probably have the Coreopsis on the top right. And then on the bottom right, that looks like a zinnia or some kind of daisy compound flower. It's really hard to tell without that color that we're used to.
Yeah, they call these like the butterfly landing pad. It's just like a magnet to draw them in that big center and very strong for butterflies to land on.
It is. It's a perfect fit. They have it's almost like, we have Orlando International Airport and
Yeah.
everything set up for those planes, and these flowers really have evolved to provide all that the butterflies need to land and nectar because they're getting a reward too. So you have to think about it's not only the butterflies, but the plants. The plants are utilizing these animals to exchange their diversity and their genes from one plant to another, and that's what they're doing. Those butterflies are carrying the pollen throughout.
Yeah, I know. Those plants are so smart.
Yeah, it's amazing, it really is. So for butterflies, we want to think backwards for that butterfly life cycle. So, it all starts with obviously, you all want that butterfly, right? We want the adult butterflies flying around. I actually just saw some mating in my backyard the other day. So, we want to see that activity where, we're enjoying that experience. But we want to work backwards because if we don't have those caterpillars and really the eggs of those caterpillars, then we're probably not going to be seeing, as many as we would like. So we want to have the adults, but we want to also have the caterpillars and the eggs. So you can see here, if we work all the way backwards, going left, on the leaf, we're seeing those eggs on the underside of this is probably like a milkweed um, vine or just some kind of generic plant, I think, for the demo. But essentially, on the underside of your milkweed leaves and your other host plants, you should see little teeny tiny eggs. They're pretty hard to find. So if you don't actually see them, that's okay. But then from those eggs come the caterpillars, and they will grow and grow. And they can just eat and eat all day long. They just eat several times their weight, and they will just eat all the leaves on your milkweed. And that is okay. We put these plants out for them as an offering. We don't want to worry about, them. Basically, they're going to turn into sticks. And that's a good thing because we know that our butterflies are maturing and taking advantage of that food source and that foliage that we've provided. So then once they get big enough, they're going to shed that skin and make a chrysalis. And you might have learned it as a cocoon, and that's okay. You can call it a cocoon, essentially, but it is known as a chrysalis. And these are gorgeous. When you see a chrysalis in your yard, it is the first time it's like magical. It looks like the most beautiful piece of jewelry you've ever seen. So, just leave it alone. That caterpillar is in there actually changing its DNA. So it actually forms into more of a liquid substance, and then it rebuilds that DNA into the wings, into the body of that adult. So it's an enriching experience that it's going through in their metamorphosis, truly. And then it becomes ready to hatch. And this is another cool thing about having butterfly plants is you will see this commonly in your garden. So you'll see the old chrysalis, kind of shell, I guess we can call it. I'm not an entomologist, but you'll basically see that little white shed there, and the butterfly will just come out, and it's basically being born, and it'll just kind of hang out. It looks very moist in a way. It looks very new to life. It doesn't know, it's kind of getting its bearings. And eventually it'll kind of dry off and fly off, and it'll be looking for those nectar sources. And so, when I see them freshly coming out of their chrysalis, I just kind of allow them that time to transition. You can imagine they just went through a lot in that metamorphosis. So, really, again, when we're looking to have those adults in our yard, we want to think backwards. We want to start with the host plant.
Yeah, and you'll see those butterflies, hanging upside down and flapping their leaves, getting the butterfly blood flowing a little bit, drying off.
Yep. Yeah, it's so precious. It really is just a lovely experience to see them coming to life. I mean, they were already alive as caterpillars, but it's just such a different experience. So giving
Yeah,
them
and
that.
that chrysalis, that does have a little like gold ring on it. It's real shiny and gold.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it really is. Yeah. So you want to get to know your butterflies and their larval host plants. So I think Tia's going to tell us a little bit more about how we can think backwards and get those host plants in our yard.
Yep, that's right. Let's get to know our butterflies, shall we? All right, butterfly number one right here, the monarch butterfly. And this one is the low-hanging fruit for butterflies. It's one of the easiest butterflies to attract to your garden. If you're gonna get started with your first plant for your butterfly garden, it should be a milkweed plant, because not only is the milkweed the larval host plant of the monarch butterfly, but it also provides nectar for butterflies. So they can complete their whole life cycle on a milkweed plant. Now get to know how to identify all the caterpillars of these butterflies too. So you'll see the picture on the right is a monarch butterfly caterpillar. And they have a very distinctive, kind of tiger striped look to them. And you'll see them munching on leaves of milkweed. So the scientific name for a milkweed, the genus name is Asclepias, or some people say Asclepias. And there's over 20 species of native milkweed in Florida. So there's a lot they can choose from, although just a couple species are commercially available. And then there are a few non-native species too that you can plant. But again, we do recommend that you have a mixture of native and non-native plants so you can get the best of both worlds. And monarchs are the only butterflies that migrate north annually. And not all of them actually migrate all the time. So be mindful of that. There are some butterflies that are that stay in Florida year round. So the native milkweed species, Tina, tell us a little bit more about these.
Yeah. So, and just as a quick side note, I just put in the chat the EDIS publication for the monarch butterfly if you want to learn more. Those are our really good UF-IFAS extension, reliable, fact-based publication information. So you can always trust those sources. Yeah. So really with the monarch butterfly, we're going to want to turn to these Asclepias species. The native ones we will find in our natural environment. And so again, that's something that's been co-evolved with the monarch species. So something we can think is this swamp milkweed or Asclepias incarnata pictured here on the left. This is going to be appropriate, as the name indicates, for more wet areas. So if you have a little depression or a berm and swale, or you're close to a lakeside area, or even if you have a retention pond that's a communal area, if you can plant some swampweed and this Asclepias incarnata species, this is going to be a great one. Again, not only for the nectar, but as a larval host species.
Yeah, you know what, Tina, that one does well too, just under normal like landscape irrigation. We have it here in our demonstration gardens. And, if you have a normal kind of irrigated landscape, that's a good choice.
Excellent. Excellent. I did not know that. So yeah, you can even give it a try. And, if you have that irrigation, I probably wouldn't do well in a dry, no irrigation, but, give it a try. I mean, these are native. They're used to, trying different things. So
Yeah, Florida
we also,
conditions.
yeah, it varies a lot. We can have literally floods, and right now it's very droughty. So, and then we also have the butterfly milkweed or Asclepias tuberosa here on the right. And this tends to be confused with our tropical milkweed. And we'll talk more about that. But this is going to be really that one color. And so that's how it really is identifiable. It's not going to have any red in it. It's just going to be that solid orange color. And it tends to, in its growth habit with the flowers, have a few more flowers on one, what we call inflorescence or bunch of flowers, where the tropical milkweed, as we'll see later, tends to just have a few, they're bunching at the top. So it tends to have a little bit more robust palette of actual number of flowers in the inflorescence or the bundle of flowers. And this one's going to do pretty well in most landscapes, I would say. Tia, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think it likes drier areas too.
Yeah, we tend to see these in our, pine flatwoods and, drier areas as well. So it's compatible with most of our residential landscapes.
Some people call it scrub milkweed too. These have a lot of common names.
Yeah. And one thing that I've seen that's really cool recently that's kind of getting a lot of buzz is if you're just starting out, think about butterfly container gardening. This would be a great pick for that if you have a little porch, if you just have, you have a yard, but you don't want to do the whole, clearing and putting it in. Just do a little, container garden of a few of these different larval and nectar species. And, it's a great way to get started.
Yeah, well, let's look at the non-native species now. Tell us about this one, Tina.
Yeah, so this one is native to Mexico. So it's a non-native, again, also known as tropical milkweed, or the binomial is Asclepias curassavica. It's a little bit of a mouthful, as
Yeah, that's
unlike our native ones, but it is extremely easy to grow. So, it's not that we don't recommend it. I think it is still appropriate to grow it here in Florida. It just can be a little weedy, so you want to watch those seed heads. So milkweeds tend to obviously not only have a milky sap that you tend to want to avoid getting on your skin, but as those flowers get pollinated, they'll make a little capsule. And this little capsule is filled with the seeds. And so as that flower gets pollinated, it'll form a capsule, and inside that capsule is all the seeds. And that capsule will get really hard, and then eventually it'll just burst open. And there'll be a bunch of fluffy seeds inside that'll get carried by the wind. And so if we're not careful, we can have a fair amount of this tropical milkweed in our garden. It's not an invasive species, so even though it's non-native, it is easy to grow. That's a good thing, but just watch those seed capsules and make sure that you're not having too many, I would say, proliferate the area. And we want to use those to self-seed or grow. So if you don't have any, but you know somebody who does, and you see that little seed capsule, you can grab it. And once those seeds mature, those are perfectly good to germinate and grow. You can also do it from cuttings. It has a very hardy stem, and it grows year round. So if you're, growing this species, you do want to cut it back once a year. So what we recommend in Central Florida and North Florida, and I'm not sure about South Florida. I don't know if you know, Tia, but we recommend cutting the milkweed back all the way to the ground. So you're going to be literally pruning it all the way to the ground, taking away the stems, the leaves, the blooms, any of that, and getting rid of it. And this is basically to encourage those the monarchs to migrate. If they are migratory, we want to tell them, okay, the food sources here are gone, go ahead and migrate. But we also want to prevent what's known as the OE protozoan parasite. And this is really an unfortunate parasite that is parasitic to the monarchs. And if you've ever seen one that has it, their wings will be, instead of upright and normal, they'll be kind of flumped over, and so it won't be able to fly properly. It's kind of sad because they just flutter around on the ground. They can't fly. So this, cutting it back in the winter time, so really November, December, cut them back. January, if you forgot to do it, cut them back. We want to make sure that we're not having blooms throughout the winter time, and that will prevent this parasite as well.
Yeah, that's right. And the native milkweed species, they go dormant in the winter. So they are perennials and they'll grow and flower, but then they'll kind of die back in the winter and there will be nothing left. You can barely tell they're there because you can cut the dead stalks off. So kind of mimic that here with the non-native one to help to prevent the disease.
That's right. Yeah, it's a perfect way of doing it because we're providing that nectar source, that food source, the foliage, but we're still encouraging them to do their migratory path as, like Tia said, with those native species are encouraging.
Okay, well, there are some more species of milkweed. We just featured these because they are the most common, but there's also giant milkweed that grows as a shrub, which is non-native. And then there's the kind of the white milkweed, Asclepias perennis, that's native and that likes kind of wet, shady areas. So there's many more, but these are the most common that we featured today. Well, next, butterfly. Let's talk about the Gulf fritillary. This is probably the second most easiest to attract to your yard next to the monarch butterfly because it likes the passion vine. And if you plant a passion vine in your yard, you're almost sure to get some of these Gulf fritillary caterpillars. You can see what the caterpillar looks like on the right-hand side. It's little black with an orange stripe, and it's very like spiky. So it looks kind of dangerous. I don't know if it actually stings you, but I don't recommend touching it. And this one likes to eat passion vine. So let's talk about the passion vine species. Tina, what do you know about the native passion vines?
So they're definitely a great larval host plant to plant in your yard. So you're going to want to make sure that you're knowing what species you're buying or getting a cutting of or planting or whatnot, because there's a lot of difference going on. So
Very true.
yeah, so typically most of them are going to be a great selection, but you do want to know that you're selecting one of the, we have a few listed here on the screen. So the Passiflora incarnata, that is a very tenacious grower. It is a purple passion flower. And so it comes in either dark purple, light purple, white. There's a little bit of a variation going on there. And even I've seen some variation in the size of the flower, but it's going to actually grow through the soil and kind of come up in different areas. And so if you're growing it on a trellis, it might cross the sidewalk and come up on the other side and say hello on that side too. So it can be a little of an aggressive type of plant, but a fantastic selection for the Gulf fritillary as a host plant. This is really the one that this species loves.
Yeah, some people call it maypop.
Yep, also known as maypop, and it can seldom make those passion fruits. For those of you that are interested in edible gardening, but typically you're not going to see. It's mostly a vegetative and flowering type of a plant, and it doesn't tend to create those plants unless it's a really older vine or something like that.
Yeah, and you see
So,
that one a lot in the wild too.
yeah,
The hiking.
exactly. And so definitely, I love the Passiflora incarnata. Another one is the Passiflora superosa. That's the corky stemmed passion flower. And so you can see here on the left, we have all of them will make those tendrils, but this one gets its name because it tends to also have a little bit of a, curve to the stem once it gets older. And this one will make little teeny tiny passion fruits, which is really adorable. But it's, again, another great host plant. And this one I have seen growing in shady areas. So if you have a shadier area, this might be one that you could choose. It'll tend to try to climb. Obviously, all of these are vining species. So you want to make sure that it has a trellis or, the plant, it might be growing on an old azalea like in my yard. And well, I'm okay with that because this one is not as pervasive. So it's not going to be covering the area, running through the ground and that type of a thing. So, that's it's a smaller I would say a smaller, more quaint version of the Passiflora. And then finally, the Passiflora lutea, the yellow passion flower. So that's the one I believe here in the middle.
Mhm.
And so that's another one. This one I would say is not as common, but I would imagine some of our native nurseries, local nurseries, might also carry it. If you are just looking at a nursery, you do again want to be careful to not select that Passiflora edulis. Edulis is going to be the fruiting kind of Hawaiian punch type of fruit juice type of you know, edible vine that you're going to plant to eat. The butterflies do not eat that one, so it's not a host species. You can't get a 2-for-1 where you're getting the fruits and the butterflies. You pretty much will need to have the Passiflora incarnata or one of these natives, and then growing separately the non-native edible, thing, if that's what you're also interested in.
Yeah, that's right. Native for the butterflies, the edible kind for us to eat.
Yeah, because I mean, Tia and I love butterflies, but we also like to grow our food. So
Or one of each.
yeah, grow one of each, or if you have to make a choice, you just make that call.
Yeah, you can't eat the maypop one, but it's not that tasty.
Yeah.
All right, next butterfly, the sulfur butterfly. So this one is also very easy to attract to your landscape. And there are a variety of sulfur butterflies, and they all like different types of senna or cassia or common plants in the pea family, the Fabiaceae family. So you'll see these big butterflies. A lot of them are yellow or orange color, and the caterpillar is also orange color. So look for these in your garden and plant some of the sennas and cassias, such as the senna lagastrina, which is the wild sensitive plant that's pictured on the left, the Senna obtusifolia, that's the sickle pod here pictured on the right. And there are many other species of Senna or cassia as well that you can plant in your landscape to attract the sulfur butterflies. So real easy one that I see those in our garden a lot, popular for gardens in Central Florida. Next, I'm going to talk about the swallowtail butterfly. And these, we have 10 species of swallowtails in Florida, but they have very different larval host plants. Unlike the last 3 butterflies we talked about, the monarch likes the milkweed, the Gulf fritillary likes the passion vine, what was that called? Sulphur butterfly likes, the bean family plants, but swallowtails, the different species like a lot of very different plants. So I'm not going to talk about each species differently here, but the larval host plants include things like the wild lime, the native wild lime, the wild cherry, magnolia trees, tulip trees, pond apple, the pawpaw little bush, and also like just herbs in your herb garden, the parsley, fennel, and dill. So if all of a sudden you come out and your parsley plant is chomped down to a nub, you likely have a swallowtail caterpillar eating that. So each of the swallowtail butterflies have caterpillars that looks very different. You can see the 2 caterpillars on the right hand here. One has spikes and the other one has these eyes, which aren't true eyes, but markings on its body. And so they look very strange. So be sure to take a picture of a caterpillar and email it to your local extension center if you're not sure what kind of caterpillar it is. We can help identify it for you. And they also have a lot of resources on the University of Florida websites, like the featured creatures. You can look them up there. So just a quick tip here, the giant swallowtail is the largest butterfly in Florida, and it is a very beautiful butterfly. And these are easy to get in your home landscape. Plant some citrus trees. The wild lime is a type of citrus. Plant some herbs and some of these other trees to attract the swallowtail. So next is the zebra longwing, and this is Florida's state butterfly. It's kind of a more dainty little butterfly, and you'll see it often in more shadier gardens. So like the Gulf fritillary, the zebra longwing's larval host plants include the different species of passion flower. So the Passiflora incarnata, the purple passion flower, the maypop, also the suberosa, the corky stemmed. And the caterpillar itself is white, all white with these black spikes. So it's not too often that I actually see these caterpillars, but I do see the butterflies, the zebra longwing butterflies. So plant some passion vine to attract these to your garden. So the Buckeye butterfly, this is another easy one to attract to your garden. And you can distinguish this by the little eyes that the butterfly has on its wings. That's how it gets the name Buckeye. And this one, it seems to like purple flowers. For some reason, the false foxglove, the twin flower, the Carolina wild petunia, and then also this Indian plantain pictured here on the left. So those are the larval host plants of the Buckeye. They'll eat the leaves, lay their eggs on these types of plants. So the Indian plantain, that's something that just kind of grows as a weed. It's kind of a native or naturalized plant here, but the twin flower and the petunia, those are things that you might want to buy at a native nursery and plant in your landscape.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that plantago, the Indian plantain, I mean that's considered a weed by some people. So,
Yeah,
that's why it's really important to know those weeds before you use any type of herbicide or anything like that, because there could be little critters on there hosting and feasting. So,
yeah,
and
this caterpillar is kind of small too, and kind of camouflages pretty good.
yeah, a lot of them are camouflage because they are very good bird food. So, they camouflage right in. We might not even see them. And then just another note about the twin flower on the bottom right, it's just such a great ground cover. So if you're having issues with getting, maybe some erosion or establishment, even in like a little shadier part shade area, twin flower is a great one. And they do love those teeny, tiny purple flowers.
Yeah, these all kind of can do well in shade too.
Mhm. Yeah, the Ruellia too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, I love that Buckeye butterfly. We see that around our extension gardens. So Tina, tell us a little bit about, picking your site for your butterfly garden. What do you need to get it set up?
Yeah. So again, if you are not ready to commit to, what I'm about to talk about, don't be intimidated. Start with one container, just get a small manageable container, put a few species in there, maybe 3, 4, 5, and just plant them nice and just start off nice and small. So we don't want to intimidate everybody. Sometimes it can feel a little daunting, but for those of you that are ready to go, you want to choose a sunny spot. So full sun, which is 6 hours or more per day. You want it to be viewable from your house or, your porch or patio or wherever you're planning on enjoying these butterflies, so that you can, not only enjoy the butterflies, but keep an eye on the plants, make sure they're doing well, make sure that they're watered and, the habitat is thriving. You want access to water, so you want to be able to establish these plants. Even though we do talk about water conservation a lot, we want to make sure that we are establishing our plants. So we go and buy something, we want to make sure we're watering it every day at least, once a day. Sometimes with my new shrubs and things, I'm watering those morning and evening just to make sure that they are establishing well. And what we recommend is a 10 by 10 or larger area is best. But again, any size that you can do, some of us, even with the 0 lot lines, might not have a 10 by 10, but whatever you can do. They just recommend a 10 by 10 because the butterflies are going to be able to jump from plant to plant. But if you think about it, if everybody even has a little bit, they'll be able to do that much better. And once you get this ball rolling, you will plant it and they will come. So I know when I moved into my house, my neighbors said, wow, it's like we've had a 100% increase in butterflies, in our area. So you plant these species and they will come.
That's a good message. Yeah, even just having one, milkweed plant, you could get a monarch.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
Then you want to make your design. So, with Florida Friendly, we want things to still have a beautiful aesthetic. And so we're planting these with a purpose and a goal for butterflies, but we also want to be sure that we're, staying in step with our, if you live in an HOA, a homeowners association, that you're using the same kind of themes and codes of their feel of the neighborhood. So, definitely talk to your HOA before, if you do have a design in mind that is, a little bit on the bigger side, you want to get their approval prior to starting. But as you're planning your design, again, we want to think about those ecological layers. So when we think about any type of ecosystem, we're going to be looking at the ground covers, the shrubs, and the layering. And that could even be just within ground covers. So you could have one that's just a few inches, maybe the twin flower leading up to maybe a wild coffee or some other type of plant, and grouping those plantings together. So the butterflies are really tuned into being able to kind of nectar in the same way from the same plant. And so we want to kind of cluster those together. And over time, if you're choosing natives that reseed, you might get a little more of a mosaic in your landscape, and that's okay too. But to start out, we definitely recommend grouping those plants together, choosing lots of color like we talked about at the beginning, and then designing a small garden or your whole garden. So it could just be a little bit at a time, or maybe you want a master plan. In our landscape design class, we actually have people bring in their home survey, pull out the graph paper, and design their whole property. And you're not going to be installing the whole property at once. Again, going back to that, let's not get overwhelmed. But you do want to have a master plan so that kind of the direction you're going. So you know where the butterfly garden is, where maybe the other themed gardens are, or general directions. So once you know where that butterfly garden is, then you'll have a smaller scale layout for that area. And this is really how landscape designers, how landscape architects do their designs.
That's right. And you can even buy your plants and, all right, this one's going to go in the back. It's a little taller. Here's some small ones for the front, and then bring it home and kind of lay it out in your area too.
Yeah. So then you're going to want to choose your plants. So we have various types of the larval host plants on the left. So we've talked about a few of these, that milkweed, passion flower, but there's some others. So the senna, that's another idea for you. Wild petunia, or the Ruellia species. Bay trees, so these are going to be a little bit bigger. And then even frog fruit, the little ground cover that likes it a little bit more wet. It's good for your swale or, little wet, depressed area. And it can take it dry too, but it does look, I think, a little bit nicer when it's happy and wet in the rainy season. And then you want the other side of the mature adult caterpillar, those nectar plants for adults. So butterfly bush, obviously the name speaks to it. The zinnia flowers, those are good. And I've noticed the zinnias are kind of nice, even though they're not native. They do persist into the heat a little bit as well. I think the dwarf zinnias don't do as well, but those traditional taller zinnias can persist into our heat or hot summers, not throughout the summer, like the gaillardia and the other natives can, but it does do well late into spring and through the summer, into the early summer. Gaillardia, we mentioned, that's going to be your red blanket flower. Tixie, that's our native Florida wildflower. Marigolds, these are great. And these again can take a little heat. They're not going to be, you know, some of these horticultural plants are just going to, tank as soon as it starts to peak into the 90s. In April, we'll see, warm days. But the marigolds will tolerate some warmth. They'll start to peter out in the heavy heat, the heavy rains, but they'll do well. Lantanas. So be careful you're not selecting the invasive lantana, but lantanas can be great. And then porterweeds. Porterweeds are fantastic. So we have our native porterweed, which is going to have, it has really nice little spikes, but they're not as dense on the flowers. So like in this picture, we have a lot of flowers on the one stalk. Porterweed tends to kind of bloom randomly, and so you'll just have little purple blooms throughout, but lots of stems. And those can do well in shade as well. So, I know we say full sun environment, but the porterweed is, I would say, an exception to that general rule, where it can do full sun and a little bit of shade as well. So,
yeah, well, let me talk more about plants here.
Yeah, so the nectar side. So looking at, the flowers, and for the adult butterflies, looking at where are they going to get that nectar that they need to persist and really, again, repeat that life cycle. So once we get the adults, they're going to be mating, like I saw the other day. They're going to be laying their eggs on the host plants on the underside of those leaves. So as soon as that baby caterpillar breaks open out of that egg, it's going to have something to munch on.
That's right.
We want to
find some food.
Yeah, they're hungry as soon as they're born, just like humans, Homo sapiens. They're very similar in that way.
A lot of these annuals you can plant from seed, like Tina was saying, the zinnia, the cosmos, the marigold, the natives, including the coreopsis, the Indian blanket, and the black-eyed Susan. The phlox is native to Texas, but it grows very well as a wildflower here. These you can all plant from seed. So if you're on a low budget, you can get, like a wildflower mix or one pack of each of these seeds and start with just bare soil and just scratch up the soil a little bit, dump your seeds on, pat them in, and voila, you can have a $5 butterfly garden. It doesn't have to be expensive. Some of these flower very quickly too, like the zinnias and cosmos can flower within 30 days, whereas some of the native species like the coreopsis, they take more like 3 months to get to a flower.
Right. And definitely this is a situation where you would want full sun, 6 hours or more of direct sunlight to get those seeds germinated and get those blooms going. So this is really beautiful. Is this in your demonstration landscape, Tia?
Yeah, it is. Those are our zinnias there, and you can see the wispy leaves of the cosmos, and then we have a little coreopsis and gaillardia mixed in there.
I like that. I like the mix. That's a nice way to do it.
Yeah, you can also pick these for cut flowers, but then the butterflies don't get the nectar.
Right.
And annuals are short-lived plants. So you can expect these to live, 1, 3 months, even a year, and then they're going to die. But some of them will be self-seeding, like the coreopsis or the black-eyed Susan. when they flower, the seeds, let the seeds drop, or go ahead and smush them together, let them drop on the soil, or you can save the seeds in a paper bag and then reseed your butterfly garden again, the next year. And the good time of the year to plant these is kind of like vegetable gardens, like September, October, November in the fall. And then again, January, February, March in the spring. Some of them will get damaged if we have a freeze. So be mindful of that. Not the native plants, but the zinnias and cosmos can get damaged by a freeze.
Yeah, I just love those black-eyed Susans. They're the Rudbeckia species. They're hardy and just so lovely, really beautiful. And yeah, it just really is a matter of if you want to save the seeds, if you're organized and you can dry them out and package them, or, like me, sometimes I'm a bit of a lazy gardener. I'll just make sure to rub those seeds around and let them go in the garden, and then they come back and you say, oh, okay, there's that Monarda species or whatever it was, and they just, the earth kind of stores it for you until it's ready, and then it pops back.
Yeah, actually, in our Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide, this is a great resource to look for the plants here. It's the Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide to Plant Selection and Landscape Design. It actually lists some of these, like the Coreopsis, as both an annual and a perennial, because they do come back. Technically, I think they're an annual, but some people call them a perennial. They do come back every year by seeding, so they're not technically a perennial, but they come back. So let's talk more about perennials. So this would be what I would focus on if I really want like a permanent butterfly garden and I don't have to replant it a little bit. Get some of these hardy perennials that you can plant once and then it's set, for the whole year. Perennials live for many years, maybe 2 to 3 years, maybe longer, depending on the species. So some examples of plants here are salvia, pentas that are pictured in the center here with the little white flowers. And in this picture, these plants are planted in groupings. So like the pentas, the white flower in the middle of the photo, there's about 10 penta plants right there because we have a large area. So we plant like 1, 2, 3, kind of in a tic-tac-toe pattern, and that makes a nice mass grouping of plants for the butterflies to come and visit. To the left side of the penta is the native frog fruit that we mentioned earlier. That's a ground cover. And to the right of the pentas is the African basil, which is also very long-lived. So these are all planted in masses. So salvia, pentas, lantana. Again, there's native species. There's cultivars that you can buy at the store. There's the non-native species that grows in the wild. You have to watch out for that. The bush daisy is a beautiful yellow flower, and that grows in a big mound. I mean, almost 2, 3, 4 feet tall in a big, beautiful mound. That one has done great, and it can live for many years, and it almost blooms year round. Like all asters, it's a great plant for butterflies. And then our milkweed, of course, which we've discussed, the porterweed, the purple porterweed. There's a pink or coral color porterweed that has a little bigger leaves, and that's a non-native. But then the native porterweed, you can buy that at native nurseries, and that's more lower growing with the pretty purple spikes. The African basil pictured here, and the bulbine. Bulbine is a great butterfly plant. It's a succulent. It does well in hot, dry areas, and it blooms almost year round too. You can also plant that in a cluster, so you get a lot of flowers together, and it will be very colorful.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just going to throw in the chat the Florida Association of Native Nurseries is a great place to start to get native plants. So check that out. You can find a nursery near you. They're obviously it's statewide, so that's a really good one.
Yeah, that's a great resource to find a native plant nursery. So salvias, so we say plant salvia. Well, there are many salvias that you can plant in your landscape. Pictured here is the red salvia. That's also called tropical sage, or people have different names for it. This can grow in some shade. It is native and it is year-round flowering, very beautiful. The lyre leaf sage is also a native type of salvia that looks similar with purple flowers, and that kind of grows from a basal rosette. That one is mowable if you're looking for, things you can sneak into your corners of your lawn that are flower butterfly plants. Lyre leaf sage is a good choice. The other three listed are non-native. The Mexican sage, it kind of has the fuzzy leaf and the purple flower. The pineapple sage looks very similar to this red tropical sage, but the flowers are a little bit more tubular. And then just other varieties of purple salvia and sage that grow. So get like one of each, and that way you can have, red blooms, white blooms, pink blooms, purple blooms, and you'll be sure to have lots of plants for your butterfly garden.
Yeah, and that red salvia also comes in white and I think pink,
Yeah, pink.
and it reseeds very well. The red I've noticed it tends to reseed a little better. I don't know why, just maybe in my yard, but definitely a good hardy reseeder. So it's a good bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's a great plant. So let's talk about shrubs. So there's some nectar plants that are shrubs, and that Mexican sage, purple one here, that's what I was talking about in the last slide. And that will almost get like shrub like, it can get 3 feet tall. Behind this one is the pink jatropha, which I should have put on the list here, but I didn't. And then in the very back is a nice hedge of firebush. So these are good nectar plants that you can plant for the adult butterflies. You can also throw in some liriope, these green ones in the front. They don't really do too much for butterflies, but if you just want it to look green and like a nice landscape, evergreen, year round, looking good, you could throw in some more permanent plants like that. Also, the yellow bush pictured here is not a very good nectar plant, but it's the Thyralis. And this has a lot of golden blooms on it, but it's not really known to be much of a pollinator plant, but it still can look good in your butterfly garden. So other ones I have listed here, butterfly bush, that will be kind of like purpley looking, and that can get even to 10 feet tall. The cassia and sennas, those get the yellow flowers, part of the bean family. The purple plumbago, you see that all the time on the sides of the roads. It gets that nice purple flower that the bees and butterflies love. That's a very, can take full sun, drought tolerant plant that does well in, neglected landscapes, you can say, like roadsides and in the bottle brush, like we talked about earlier. So trees can be nectar plants too. And here we have pictured our flatwoods plum, and that blooms in the spring. But some other good choices, here's the bulbine too in the front, the yellow bulbine, and then that little purple flower in the middle is a purple tipicina, a dwarf tipicina. But the fiddlewood, which is a native that has very good smelling little clusters of white flowers. The almond bush is also a good smelling white flower that's non-native. The jatropha that was pictured on the last one with the pink flowers, and the coral bean, which is a native and that can grow in shade as well, and that gets the pink tubular flowers. So vines, you might have a place for a couple vines. We talked about the passion vine. That's good for getting your zebra longwing and your Gulf fritillary. The coral honeysuckle vine here, this is a great one for butterflies, and it's also a hummingbird magnet. So this is native. Pick that up at your native nursery and grow some of that in your yard. It's a beautiful plant. Also the climbing aster, that's a native with the purplish white flowers, and the native trumpet vine, which looks very similar to this, but larger flowers that are orange in color. So get some of these vines for your yard. So I'll let Tina wrap it up here with just a couple finishing touches.
Absolutely. So we definitely want to consider the other Florida friendly principles because there are a full 9 principles. Want to make sure that we're adding a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch to these plants so that they have the water being held in that root zone. Want to maintain, but we don't want to keep it too neat. So, obviously no spraying of pesticides or herbicides. Consider leaving maybe the older blooms, or, it just depends on if you want it really manicured, but, you can have it be a little bit more wild when it's a butterfly area. And I've seen some of our parks do that in particular. If you have the plantain, the wild plantain, it might look a little bit more unkept, even though that is a larval host species. So the goal is these pollinators. And then you want to add the new plants as needed. So, as you put some in, those annuals might die, or you might have some that don't fully make it. Make sure it's the right plant in the right place, and then, fill in those plants as needed. Watering efficiently, we want to make sure that we're using low flow irrigation. Micro irrigation pictured here on the bottom right is perfect for butterfly gardens. It's going to be watering directly at the root zone. So a lot of our overhead sprayers, our rotors are going to cast too much water onto the leaves of the plants. And so we want to make sure with this micro irrigation that we're watering just the root zone. Adjust the irrigation based on the weather and the season. So like Tia talked about, we are in the St. Johns River area. We are now allowed to water 2 times per day, but we want to make sure that we're just watering as much as needed. And so I like to put a little tuna can out, turn on my irrigation for 15 minutes and see how much water's in my tuna can. We're looking for 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch to make sure that our plants are getting watered properly. Use a rain barrel. We're coming up on a rainy season starting in May, so capture that water and utilize it. Butterfly gardens are a great place to do that. And then create a rain garden. So this would be a little depressed area where you're putting in species that like it a little bit more wet, and they definitely do like it. There are butterfly species that like it wet.
Yeah, you can plant butterfly in your rain garden too. That's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then we need to provide water for these butterflies. So when we think about habitat, we want to think about cover, space, water, and food. And so if we miss one of those, we're actually not creating that habitat for that animal. So butterflies, when we think about their life, history, that they actually require the absorption of water in wet and moist soil. So they're incapable of drinking from freestanding water like, a bird would or a dog would. They need just moist, a puddling station, what we call. So you see, essentially to make one, you're just using a little saucer that you would use for the bottom of a container. You're going to put in rocks and different types of soil. That's going to give them the nutrients they need, but also provide them a substrate to stand on and just keep that moist. Now, of course, when our mosquitoes move in, just make sure it's not too moist because then the larva will persist and we don't want mosquito larvae. We want, obviously the adult butterflies to drink from this puddling station.
Yeah, that's a great activity for kids too. I just keep mine right next to my rain barrel so I can put the fresh water in it from time to time.
That's perfect. Yeah. And then, of course, we want to fertilize responsibly. So, like Tia mentioned at the top of the hour, we definitely want to be using a slow release material that's 65% slow release nitrogen or more. We don't want to over fertilize, never fertilize before heavy rains. Don't use pesticides. Obviously, those can kill insects, and that's what we're trying to do. So, make sure that you're reading the label and applying your fertilizers appropriately.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people, are spraying stuff on their vegetables. Don't get that on your butterfly plants.
Yeah, and then thinking beyond our yard. So, Tia, why don't you tell us a little bit about that community butterfly scaping? How can we kind of get this throughout our area?
Yeah, well, it's more of like a community initiative. So there's a whole EDIS publication that was written on it and how to organize this in your communities. But the simple idea is if we create corridors that butterflies, where everyone has a couple butterfly plants in their front yard, then it will provide long-standing habitat for butterflies to just live and thrive in your community. And it will be beautifying your community too and attracting other beneficial insects. So this is like a community-wide initiative. You could get your HOA to, adopt the community butterfly scaping. And it's just planting a lot of butterfly attracting vegetation that will provide all their basic needs.
Yeah, and I just chatted that in the chat. So
Oh,
check
great.
out that EDIS publication.
Yeah. And then we also have the app, the Butterfly app. And so if you go to the FFL website, you can find the apps page, and we have 4 free apps. One of them is the Butterfly Gardens app. And in that app, you can look for different butterflies and find out what their larval host species are. You can look at butterfly plants and find out if it's a nectar plant or a larval host plant. And then you can use the butterfly design part of it too, where you just, say, okay, I want to have a small garden. It's in the shade. I'm in zone 9B, and it will pick a custom palette of plants for you. So there's 190 butterfly plants in the app. There's 62 butterflies. And it's not an app that you download on your phone. You just go to the website and you can find it there. And so that's kind of leading principle number 1, which is the right plant in the right place. So be sure to use the Butterfly app to select plants that are matching the conditions of your site, whether you have sun or shade or wet or dry. So that concludes our butterfly gardening workshop today. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about butterflies. What a happy day. And, follow us on Facebook. I'm on the Garden Florida Facebook. You can find Tina on the UF-IFAS Extension Seminole County Facebook. I also post pictures of flowers and butterflies on our Instagram, and we have websites and stuff. So at this time, if you would be so kind to complete our survey, you can use your smartphone and scan the QR link here. And it's just a very quick survey, or we can put the link to the survey in the chat box. Do you have that, Tina?
Actually, I do not have the survey link. I just chatted the Garden Florida Facebook and then also the Seminole County Facebook, but
All right, I just put the survey link in there.
excellent. Yes, please do complete our survey. It'll just take a couple minutes, if that, and it really helps us to improve our programming.
That's right. And we have one survey now. We'll be sending you a follow-up survey in a couple months to see, did you plant any butterfly plants? How is your garden growing? So please do the survey, and let's open it up for some questions, Tina. If you guys have a question out there, you can write in the Q&A box.
There are a lot of questions, Tia. I'm seeing 49, so I don't think we're going to get to all of them, and I apologize to each and every one of you. But let's talk about at least a couple of them. So one of them was, do we have a list of natives for attracting butterflies? And we did chat the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. So I would go there as a start. And then they asked a follow-up question. Besides native nurseries, do you know of any plant nurseries that guarantee or pledge that their plants have not been sprayed with pesticides or herbicides so the pollinators won't be harmed?
I don't know of a pledge like that.
I haven't heard of a certification or anything, but honestly, the the pesticides will probably not be persistent as long as you're not actively using them in your garden. You should be fine. And then the next question that I thought was interesting is we had aphids on our milkweed last summer. Should we treat it if it returns this year? And if so, how are we going to be hurting the monarchs?
Yeah, aphids, they're not a very bad pest. So they do minimal damage, and there's a lot of beneficial insects that will eat those aphids. So don't worry about the aphids, just leave them be. Don't spray any pesticides on your milkweed because they can hurt the monarchs.
That's right. The aphids aren't going to be a big deal. So
Yeah,
if they're concerning you, just squish them.
spray them off
Um,
with the hose.
yeah, and they're not going to be a problem. So I just want to reiterate that we do recommend cutting back that tropical milkweed in about November, December time, all the way to the ground. I know there was a few questions on that. And then you are you going to cover ways to prevent wasps from eating all the cats? I'm not sure. I think
Yeah,
they
the
meant
caterpillars. No, the parasitic wasps are a problem because that's what they do. They attack caterpillars, good and bad. So there's really nothing that you want to do in the landscape. That's just basic ecology. But if you do concerned about your butterfly caterpillars, then you could put them in a little, butterfly house and protect them. But that's just natural selection. The wasp will get some of the caterpillars, and that's okay.
yeah, and wasps are actually good in your landscape because they're going to be predator, preying on other problematic bugs. So, wasps are actually a good thing in your landscape where they're going to be, as long as they're not in close proximity to your home. If they're in the landscape, that's totally acceptable because they're going to be preying on those bad bugs and things like that. Another question we had was, let's see, the recording. Will we make the recording available?
Yep, we'll be sending that to everybody probably tomorrow or so.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what else we have. Um, a lot of questions about that tropical milkweed. So again, just make sure you cut that back in about November or December. And just seeing what else. Okay, if you plant milkweed that has the OE parasite, should the plant be destroyed? Now, my understanding is that that parasite is not necessarily on the plant, that it's a parasite that exists in the insect. Is that right, Tia? Or
I'd have to get some more UF experts on that, but as I understand, as long as you cut it back, it's the thing to do. Cut it back so there's no old vegetation that the parasite can live on.
yeah. Okay, and then will Passiflora tuberosa grow in the full sun?
Is that Asclepias tuberosa?
Um, yeah, they put Passiflora suberosa.
Oh, tuberosa. Oh, that one. Yeah, I think that grows in full sun. We have one in a pretty sunny location here. Yeah, part shade to full sun.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Well, I see, I'm just going through here. Okay, so she has tons of caterpillars on her milkweed, but she couldn't find any chrysalis. Could we give her a hint as to why?
Well, the chrysalis, they usually kind of leave the milkweed, and you might look at your fence or some stick piles or something a little close, but a little away from the milkweed too.
Yeah, I've seen them under the eaves of my roof. They kind of like it dry and like away, secure where, hopefully something won't find them and eat them. So definitely, they're kind of hiding from you. So you might not always see them. And then if you start in a container, yes, we do recommend you probably put that in a full sun area, just depending on which species you select, but usually full sun is going to be best. My butterfly bush seems susceptible to spider mites. Any suggestions?
Ooh, spider mites. You could increase the airflow to let some more air in there, like prune it out a little bit. Um, it might just be in a little shady spot. If it's in full sun, they usually don't get pest problems. So just try to, do some cultural control practices like that. The spider mites can be hard to kill with the pesticides, so I would try to air it out first.
Yeah, and maybe cut back on the irrigation. I know spider mites, they tend to come seasonally too. So if they're just kind of coming seasonally and, you can prune that part off and, then they kind of disappear. We do see, like Tia said, with ecology, you're going to see some different changes in the landscape, and it could be those problematic spider bites or those wasps or things, but eventually they're going to kind of carry on and take off. Okay, and maybe just for the sake of time, last one here, we have um, her and her son were doing milkweed, but it seems like the caterpillars were eating all the milkweed. And so she planted more milkweed this year, but now she's worried she's going to get more caterpillars and it'll just never be enough milkweed. So what do we recommend?
Mother Nature takes care of the caterpillars and they find a way, they'll maybe go somewhere else or find something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you can, you're planting, a few milkweeds and they're good. I think that's adequate. You obviously have a robust population, so that's a good thing. I wouldn't worry too much about them eating it all the way down. That's pretty typical, and the plant will respond by coming back. So with
Yeah,
that,
that's right.
I
All
think
right. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. And please complete the survey. And we will be sending you an email with the link. If you have more questions, then you can contact us. So thanks for joining us and have a great day.
thanks everyone. Thanks, Tia.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.